In this challenge, we are going to do some let and const repetitions, because I've created this fictional game here, which has a player, an opponent, the name of the game, a points variable, and a has1 variable. After it's been set up, the game is played down here at line 9 and 10, the player gets some points, and the has1 variable is flipped, and then based upon this, we log out who the winner is in this conditional statement down here. Now, if you try to run this code, you'll see that it actually doesn't work, because I've mixed up a little bit in terms of using let and const. So you need to fix that. You need to go through all variables and decide if they should be let or const. And then finally, I want you to change the console logs here from using double quotes to using template strings. So go ahead and do this right now. Okay, hopefully this went well. Let's go through this. Now, what I want to start with is actually by looking at which variables that are reassigned. And that is actually just the two ones down here, points and has1. There's no reassignment below and neither above. So that's just the initial assignments. So that means that the points and has1 are the ones that must be let variables. Because remember, let variables can be reassigned, consts cannot. So we'll do let and let. And these two need to be so. That means that these three variables point to the same value throughout our entire program. It'll work perfectly fine with using let, and if you prefer that, that's also okay, but it is a good practice to use const when you can, to enforce a bit more strictness in the code and to hint to people who are potentially reading your code down the line that these variables won't be reassigned. So actually, I'm going to do that and use const for these three variables. Now we can run the code, and yeah, we can see that it actually works. Pierre got 100 points and won the Amazing Fighter game. That comes from this string right here, which we want to turn into a template string. And the way we got to do that is now wrap the entire expression in backticks. And here we're starting off with a JavaScript variable. So we'll escape out of the string like that. We'll remove all of these plus and quotes, yet again, $, curly brackets, and then we also need the escaping here as well. Let's run the code. Works just as it did previously, but now we have this much more neatly packed expression. Doing the same here, like that, and that. Like that. And that's it. Great job doing this challenge. Let's move on. In this challenge, you are going to create a function that takes a single parameter, that should be an array, and then it logs out all the items of the array to the console. And I've created this myCourses array here so that you can test your function. Go ahead and write this function starting here on line 7 and then return back to me when you want to see my solution. Okay, let's do this. We'll do function. I'll call it log items, like that. I'll name the parameter r. And then inside of the function, I need to write my for loop for let I equals 0. I is less than r dot length and I plus plus. And in the body of the for loop, we'll simply do console.log ri, like that. Let's try to run the code. Log items, passing in myCourses. And we get Learn CSS Animations, UI Design Fundamentals, and Intro to Clean Code logged to the console. And these are all courses that you can take in the future when your web development skills are a little bit further down the line and you're ready to truly level up your design skills and your software craftsmanship. But enough about that for now, let's just move on. Okay, now we are going to verify that you actually know how to use local storage. So you're going to do three things. First, save a value to local storage. It could be any value, a simple string, an array, that doesn't matter. Just choose whatever you want and give it whatever key you want as well. Then I want you to delete that code. and refresh the page so that you start with a clean slate again. Because this highlights the power of local storage, the fact that you can come back, fetch values from local storage in a context which is completely unrelated to the time when you saved to local storage. So your third step is to fetch the value from local storage and log it out. So go ahead and give this a shot right now. Okay, let's do this. First, we're going to do local storage dot set item, open and close parentheses, and let's do my credits. This could, for example, be in an e-commerce shop where you gifted credits to people who came to your website on a certain day and saved it in their local storage. And maybe you got 100 credits this time. I'll run the code. Seemingly, nothing happens, but let's hope it works. Because now I'm going to delete this and also rerun the code again. I'm coming back on a later day. And now I'm going to do local storage dot get item my credits, like that. Let's store that in a variable. My credits equals local storage, and then console log out my credits as well. Running the code, and yes, we are logging out 100, meaning that our local storage implementation works. So give yourself a pat on the back and let's move on. In this challenge, we are going to repeat add event listener and how to fetch out values from objects that live inside of arrays. So it's a three-part challenge. First, you are to fetch the button from the DOM and store it in a variable. The button I'm talking about is this one right here. You can see it says log Jane's score. It's defined here in the HTML, so maybe you have to modify that as well to give it an ID. I don't know. And then once you have that button stored in a variable, you are to use add event listener to listen for button clicks. And when the button is clicked, you are to log out Jane's score. And you got to do it via the data array. So you got to head into data, find Jane's object, and log out the value of her score. So go ahead and give this your best shot right now. Okay, let's do this. So first we are to fetch the button, and as we saw, the button didn't have any IDs, so it'll be hard to grab it. So I'll give it an ID, call it Jane-BTN, like that. And then I'll do const Jane-BTN equals document.getElement by ID, passing in Jane-BTN. Okay, so far so good. Now we need to use the Jane button to add an event listener onto it. What kind of events are we listening for? Well, it's click events. So that's the first argument. The second one is the function we want to trigger when the button is clicked. So let's verify that this works. Button clicked. I'll run the code, click the button, and yes, indeed it works. Now we have to head into data, and data is an array. So let's actually log it out first. Okay, so we got an array with two objects. How do we get the first object of those two? Well, we know that we can use the square bracket syntax and put in the index of the item we're looking for. So I'll put in 0, run the code, click the button. Yes, we're only logging out Jane's object. How do we get the value of 52? Well, we need to use the dot notation and use dot key or dot score in our case. We run the code, log, and boom, we are logging out Jane's score. So, great job getting this far. Let's move on. Okay, now I have a really cool challenge for you because you're going to create a sentence generator. So it's this function right here. It's called a generate sentence, and it takes two parameters, desc and r. What's that? Well, it is a description and an array. And it should return a string. Actually, it's a full sentence based upon the description you pass in and the array you pass in. And it's best understood through the lens of a couple of examples. If you pass in largest countries as the description and the array China, India, USA as the array, that is the second parameter, then the function should return the three largest countries are China, India, USA. Another example, if you pass in best fruits as the description and apples, bananas as the array, it should return the two best fruits are apples, bananas. So you actually have to construct the string, fetch out each of the items, and also the length of the array. So a little bit tricky, but give it your best shot. Use a for loop and also a template string to solve this. And if you're stuck or want to see my solution, just return back to the screencast and I will of course show you how to do it. Okay, then let's do this. I'm going to first start by creating this string right here. So let base string, that's what I'm going to call it. Use a template string and do the, and then here we can't hard code the number as it's dynamic based upon how big the array is, because we're going to do r.length. And then there's a space and then a new dollar sign and curly brackets. And here we are to fill in the description, and then r and the space. Now we have the base string. What remains is simply adding each of the items to the end of this. So we'll do for let I equals 0. I is less than r.length, incrementing upwards. And then we'll do base string plus equals r, then using our iterator value. So that'll fetch out the specific item, but also remembering to add a comma after each of the items. Now let's try this. Generate sentence. Let's do highest mountains. Do Mount Everest and K2. We'll store the result of this in a sentence. And of course, then we also need to return the base string like that. And then finally console log out the sentence. Okay, not bad. We got the two highest mountains are Mount Everest, comma, K2, comma. Okay, two things to fix here. First, we need a space after the comma, like that, good. Secondly, we don't want a comma after the final item in the array. How do we fix that? What we need to do is inside of the for loop, check if we are at the last item in the array. And what is the index of the last item in the array? Well, it is 1 less than r.length. Let's do outside of the for loop, const last index equals r.length minus 1. And here we'll do if I equals last index, then we are going to do like that. If else, we are going to do like that. So what are we doing here? In this situation where I am passing in highest mountains and these two mountains, the first time of the iteration, I equals 0 and last index equals 1. So going through this for loop, it checks is I equals last index is 0 equals 1? No. So we're not doing this. We're instead jumping to this point where we are adding the comma. But then the next time around, both last index and I equals to 1. So JavaScript will run this piece of code instead. Let's try it to verify that it works. Yes, we've got it. So this was a challenging one and required you to think a little bit out of the box, but that's how it is as a developer. So I hope it didn't scare you too much. If it did, just watch it over again. Try it again now that you've seen the solution, and then I will see you in the next cast. In this challenge, you are going to imagine that you are working for about the hippest company I've ever seen. This one right here, the Brooklyn Agency, who currently consists of these super hip people right here. Your job for this agency is to make their code a little bit more dynamic, because now you can see that they have simply hard-coded out the 3 team images inside of this container. But that isn't a particularly good solution, because when they get a new employee, they would have to update the HTML. So it's actually much better to do this using JavaScript and create a function that renders out the 3 team images, because that sets the stage for easily connecting this data with a database so that you can just update the database in order to change the team if new people join or someone quits. So that is your challenge, creating a function that renders the 3 team images. And this function should be using a for loop, template strings, plus equals, and .inner HTML in order to solve the problem. Here I have provided you with an array that contains the paths to all of the images. You can see images / hip1.jpg and hip2 and hip3. And they are located over here in the images folder. And this is actually a very common situation where you get an array of paths which point to the data you need. So we could imagine that this, for example, had come from the database when you rendered the page or something like that. Right now, though, it's just hard-coded into our JavaScript file. There is a little bit of CSS here as well, but this challenge is not about CSS, it's about JavaScript, so we're just going to ignore that. Just make sure that the images use this class of team img, and you'll be just fine. So I'm going to comment out all of these images. Now we can see we cleared out the container. And I'll leave the table to you. Go ahead and solve this challenge. Okay, hopefully this went well. Now let's do it together. I'll start by grabbing the div with the ID of container, because we know we need that one. Const container equals document get element by ID container, like that. Then the function, I'll call it render images, like that. And here we need a for loop, since we are going to loop through this array. So I'll do for let I equals 0. I should be less than the length of the images array, like that. And we'll increment upwards. In here, we can use .inner HTML directly. Let's do that first and then refactor it a little bit after we've gotten it to work. So I'll do container .inner HTML plus equals. At each step in the iteration, we need to add to the current inner HTML, not just clear it out using equals. Here we'll do mg class of, see what the class was, team-img. Okay, we'll do team-img, and the source should be each of these items right here. We'll use $ curly brackets to escape out of the string, and use imgs, passing in the current index, which starts at 0 and ends at 2, meaning 0, 1, 2, perfectly suitable to use in order to fetch out items from this array. Closing the tag. Now the final step is to make sure that we run the function, which we'll do by render images, like that. We'll run the code, and boom, there we go. We have rendered the images out. Brilliant. Now let's refactor this code a little bit, because there are two things I would fix up here. The first thing we're going to fix is the .inner HTML in the inside of the for loop, because here we are interacting with the DOM 3 times, one for each iteration of the loop, and that has a cost. Manipulating the DOM has a performance cost. It takes a little bit of time that we'd like to avoid if possible. Now, it doesn't really matter when we're only rendering out 3 items, so we as humans won't be able to notice the difference anyway. However, it's a good practice to do it the most performant way, just to know how it's done, because it comes a day when you need to render out tons of things and manipulate the DOM quite a lot, and then it actually might matter. So let's fix this. What we'll do is we'll simply create a variable up here, for example, images on, and set that to an empty string. Then instead of manipulating the DOM 3 times down here, we'll simply concatenate this string onto this string. So we'll replace this entire thing with imgs DOM plus equals this expression right here. And now after this for loop has completed, this variable contains all the 3 images, and it's time to do container.inner HTML and set that equal to imgs DOM, like that. If we run the code, we can see that it works in the exact same way, just as we expected. So no visible change for us as humans, but we know that the performance under the hood is better since we're not doing DOM manipulations again and again. We're only doing it once. Okay, the final thing we should add is an alt attribute, because that is important for accessibility purposes, so that people with, for example, screen readers can understand what the images contain. And here we can do employee in the company, like that. Now we have solved this challenge and we've made it even better than the previous solution, since we now also use an alt tag for accessibility purposes. So, great job.